According to Phil Spencer, Microsoft and PlayStation have signed a binding agreement to keep Call of Duty on PlayStation following the acquisition of Activision Blizzard. That's the motto of Xbox: play wherever you want. But the real question is, how long will this deal last? Who's to say that we won't get Call of Duty every single year? Even though having Call of Duty every single year was a bad choice in itself, but who's to say that we won't get those? And who's to say that we might get Call of Duty every 2 to 3 years? And by the way, this deal is only for Call of Duty and not for other Blizzard games. Maybe the Blizzard games will be coming to Xbox Game Pass because there is no information about that. Well, someone is already unhappy with the fact that their game can come to Xbox Game Pass. And that is the president of Blizzard, because he replied to a tweet which has been deleted about what if Diablo 4 can come to Xbox Game Pass, and he says, well, that's not happening. Well, I got some bad news for you, Mr. President. It's happening, I think. Well, speaking of games, players are not really happy with this one game called Payday 3 because the developers actually said on stream that you have to be always online even if you want to play the single player. According to the statement given, you will be able to play by yourself, but I do believe that you will have to have a connection in order to play because it's made in Unreal Engine and has cross progression and cross play. And hearing this news, a lot of people are sad that this is happening in a video game again. So with the game being always online, physical copies means nothing, and the game will be only playable as long as the game is getting support. The moment they shut down the servers, you will never be able to play the game. And so you screwed up with your money. Is that what the plan nowadays for games are? To be really honest, the Payday 3 trailer just looked underwhelming. It looks very similar to that of Payday 2, but I'm not speaking for the fans really, because I believe if people love Payday, they might want to play Payday 3 as well. But that might create some problems. Speaking of new games, the narrative lead on the upcoming Fable game has left the project. Anna Mergel, who is the narrative lead, says that working on Fable was a dream come true for me, and it's wrenching to leave it behind. Playground, which is the developers of the game, has assembled a talented team, so I know it's in good hands. She's not the only person who left the studio, because the co-founder himself and also some other members also left the studio to create their own studio called Lighthouse Games. And that's not all, because some of the key members of Playground Games who worked on Forza Horizon 5 also left the studio to make their own studio, and a AAA one in that case, that is called Maverick Games. So a lot of people are leaving the playground of the Playground Games. Back in 2021, Phil Spencer said that players should be confident in the quality of the game, that is Fable, given what Playground Games have actually worked on. And if you don't know, Playground Games have worked on Forza games. And that's it. So those guys who make racing games making a Fable game is definitely interesting. We did get to see a major cutscene from Fable, but to be honest, who wants a cutscene? People want gameplay. I think developers should understand that at this point. But we are hopeful that maybe by the end of this year we might get to see something. But there is one studio that is bringing something that the fans absolutely love. In a recently deleted post on Instagram, Simon Bailey, who voiced this cop right here in NFS Most Wanted, says that the game is getting a remake and will be released in 2024. She even tagged EA and Criterion Games in that post, suggesting that this might even be truer, if that's a word. Without a doubt, NFS Most Wanted was the best NFS games of all time. Well, at least to me. The game had a killer soundtrack, a pretty good story, although it seems a bit cheesy now. And of course, Mia, who can forget her? Now, we are not so sure if the original actors will be brought back to NFS Most Wanted, but if Simon Bailey is able to post something like that, which means that they might be coming back. It would be fun, to be honest, because I really want them to replace all these cheesy lines that the game has. Criterion is the studio that is working on everything Need for Speed. I'm a bit concerned. They did make Most Wanted 2012, which was basically a Burnout Paradise, which Criterion Games are already known for anyway. Before that, they did make Hot Pursuit 2010 and also the recent Need for Speed Unbound, which actually did very well because it sold around 200,000 copies and earned $14 million in 1 month. And I did get to talk to 2 voice actors from that very game itself, so check it out, it's in my channel. But that's not the only game which is getting an enhancement, because Last of Us Part 2 is also getting one apparently. The music composer of both Last of Us game, Gustavo Santaolalla, I'm sorry for butchering your name, he said during an interview that a new version of game might be in the works. If you didn't know, Gustavo had a cameo in Last of Us Part 2 in Jackson, where you can actually see him playing his instrument. According to Gustavo, in this new version of the game, players can make his character play certain tracks. And then he said that he is not supposed to say that information. It was already claimed that Naughty Dog might be working on a director's cut for Last of Us Part 2, which makes sense since Last of Us Part 1 came to PS5 and PC. And if this comes to PC, I guess we'll just wait for a month after the game releases because it's obviously gonna be having some difficulties. Last of Us is already well celebrated as a video game, but now is also well celebrated as a TV series because the show got 24 nominations for the Emmy Awards, and the season 2 is already in the works. According to Craig Mazin, the director of Last of Us, says that the season 2 will not cover the entire Last of Us Part 2 because that story will be divided into 2 seasons. But he says it might happen only if people like season 2 well enough so that season 3 can still get renewed. At this point, I can say Last of Us is pretty overrated by now. Speaking of things overrated, a new Marvel game has been announced by EA themselves. It is none other than Black Panther, which has been made by EA's own Cliffhanger Games. It is a studio which is led by Kevin Stephens, who was the boss of Warner Brothers Monolith Studio and was also a part of the development of Middle-earth, Shadow of Mordor, and Shadow of War. The team also includes veterans from games like Halo, God of War, and Call of Duty. This will be a third-person single-player story-driven game, but it's quite early in development. Well, how big and how well-designed this game will be, it is way too early to tell. But that is not the only Marvel game that is coming from EA, because Motive Studio are also working on an Iron Man game. This studio was involved in Star Wars Squadron and the recent Dead Space remake, so I'm pretty much sure that they might do a pretty decent job. We are definitely in a different era of video games, not because Marvel games have been made, but because EA wants to make single-player games. Let that sink in. And speaking of syncing, the PC performance of PC games are really syncing. Take a look at this video to know why that's actually happening.